Welcome to When Movies Were Good, a laid-back discussion about all your favourite films from the silent era up until 1959. You can hear our channel's content on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and follow all new updates and events on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Please give us a thumbs up or a good review, whatever your favourite podcast channel allows for. It helps to get us in front of more people. And now, on with the show.
Happy New Year, everybody. Just when you thought you'd heard The Last of Us, no, we are back with a vengeance in 2022 with a new episode of When Movies Were Good. I, of course, am Rachel here at the Resort Studios, aka my back flat, with the lovely guest star of the show, the only guest star of the show, Matt. How are you, Matt? Happy New Year.
I am good. All the better to be podcasting with you, my dear.
Yes, that's what we were saying. It's been a long time between drinks, so to speak. But we're glad to be here again in the Resort Studios recording, and we hope everybody out there had a fantastic New Year, wherever you spent it, anywhere in the world. Was it cold? Was it hot? It was fairly, humid here, I guess you could say.
Yes, it was very humid.
Yeah, so
It was like Manhattan in July.
Yeah. Yeah, Melbourne in January is a bit like Manhattan in July, I'd say. Because I think Matt and I have both been in Manhattan in July. You've been there in July? Yeah, I have too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know why my unit chose that time. It's much more affordable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very sticky there. But yeah, that's actually a nice little segue into James Cagney, because he was born in New York City. James Francis Cagney Jr. was born July 17th, 1899, and he is the subject of our movie double tonight on When Movies Were Good.
Well, his parents certainly wouldn't have slept in the city that never sleeps when he was born.
Yeah.
as I am sure I will learn in a few months with my own child.
Yes, that's right. So Matt has a lot of happy things happening this year, so we will keep you informed of everything that's happening in that regards. So we're doing the great Jimmy Cagney. What's not to love about James Cagney is one of these sort of jack of all trades, sort of the triple threat, the dancer, the actor, the singer. Really well known for his gangster films, I guess you could say, but he also had a lot of other presence in the other disciplines of dancing and singing.
And he seems to have, to an extent, been a bit of a forgotten figure, because I think a lot of people now know him as that reference they make in Fawlty Towers when Basil's gotten that concussion from falling down, and they're trying to convince him to impersonate Jimmy Cagney rather than Hitler when he's trying to entertain some German guests. Don't mention the war.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Is that the one when he's walking around as Hitler in the... Oh, yeah,
when he's doing the kick.
Yeah. Well, we saw a live version of that once, and I think the guy was doing that.
Must have done Pilates.
Yeah. So James is known for playing sort of like tough guys in a lot of these gangster films. So The Public Enemy, which is one that we'll be doing tonight. Taxi, 1932... We've got The Roaring Twenties, 1939, and then, of course, White Heat, which I actually watched because I thought we were actually doing Yankee Doodle Dandy and The Public Enemy because we wanted to showcase him in different roles, and I had it in my mind. So just a quick FYI, White Heat was a really interesting film. It was quite enjoyable. He's older in that film, made in the late 40s, and definitely worth checking out. And Madonna also has a good song called White Heat, which uses some of the dialogue from the film. And so, of course, in the second film that we're discussing, James actually won an Academy Award for his role in Yankee Doodle Dandy, which was 1942.
A well-deserved one. It was a surprisingly enjoyable experience. You wouldn't think a biographical film could deliver so much, because so often when you see a film that sort of directly takes from a person or an event, it's like they just let that... they think the interesting storyline powers the script, but this was a very good script to accompany a good story and a good figure to take a dive into. Yeah,
so his actual roots come from like theatre, and he did spend several years in the vaudeville circuit as a dancer and a comedian, and that sort of comes across in Yankee Doodle Dandy as well. So he got his start in the silent era. His first major role was in 1925. And then he actually, Al Jolson, who's a bit of a controversial figure a bit more now just because he was a performer that, used a certain kind of performing that's not, sort of frowned upon now. He actually saw James Cagney in a play, and that's how he went to Warner Brothers, and that's how he actually got started. So he was signed onto a contract, one of those 400 a week things, and then from there, that's how he started. And I think The Public Enemy was his first major film. And then he went from there. But he also had, he worked with Doris Day. He was retired for many years and still was acting into the early 80s. He did the movie Ragtime in 1981, which I'm sure I have seen that, because he did actually pass away in 1986, aged 86. So he did have a long career. He had time away, and then he did a couple of TV things before he passed away. Love Me or Leave Me with Doris Day in 1955. He was also nominated for an Academy Award for that. But a little bit like, who was our friend, Olivia de Havilland? He actually, she sort of sued for her right to go off and do different films and get out of her contract. He also sued Warner for a breach of contract and won in 1935. So that was, maybe he was one of the first men that went against one of the big studios. So, I don't think Jack Warner was too happy with him, but he was very involved with the USO tours, as many of those talented stars were at the time, and he also served as the president of the Screen Actors Guild. So he was really in there.
Yeah, he would, of course, been most well known for his gangster roles, like you said, but he clearly had a strong empathy for the workers' cause of his profession, say, and that's why he felt a bit emotionally conflicted in Yankee Doodle Dandy, because again, that was a story of a songwriter who, like was common in the time, had the combined roles of actor, producer, and songwriter, and he basically didn't commit himself necessarily on the popular front when it came to an us versus their mentality with the producers.
Yeah, it's he does seem like he was a very sort of strong character. So if we go into his first film that we're discussing, The Public Enemy, 1931. So this was actually a pre-code, all-talking film. So as Matt was saying before we started the podcast tonight, like when the actors first started transitioning over from silent to talkies, they all spoke in a very sort of affected way. But you were saying you thought in this film he actually made it quite natural compared to some other actors he was working with.
Well, the way he talks in The Public Enemy, it's so clear, both in a technical audio sense, but also in a character sense, that he cuts right through. It's almost like you've taken one film from the early 30s when sound technology was really in its infancy, and then taken a later sound film with just Kenny's parts and intersected them together. He has that extra energy that everyone else on the screen, because they just seem to be trying to find themselves in this new medium working. Because in a way, in this in the early 30s, film had almost sort of rewound the clock, because it had got so far in conveying story and content through the purely visual medium, but it was kind of sort of shaking on its feet in the early years.
Yeah, I think there was that transitional phase, and this film was directed by William A. Wellman, and he was the first director to win an Academy Award for directing a film called Wings, which I haven't seen but would like to. And who else did we have in this film? Well, we had the beautiful Jean Harlow, we had Edward Woods and Joan Blondell. It was a tragedy what happened to her. Yeah, I need to read a bit more about her life, but she had that very she was the blonde bombshell, but she had a really sort of, face that you couldn't forget sort of thing. She was very striking. She was a very handsome woman.
I think that's why I think it was that striking feature that sold a lot of tickets.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So everyone looked fantastic in this film, and I just couldn't believe how, like, they had travelators and stuff, like escalators. Am I getting confused between this and maybe White Heat? But in the Public
They
Enemy,
did have some escalators.
Yeah.
When you think of it, escalators aren't that complex a technology.
Yeah.
It's just like in only some of the most elite supermarkets and
Department
or
stores and
department
stuff.
stores that they'd have really had them. Because I actually read years ago one of the autobiographies the actual Maria von Trapp wrote, talking about when they went from Austria to America in the early years of World War II, and what a shock to the system was when she saw an escalator for the first time. So that shows, yes, they were around, but it was like in a very concentrated part of the world.
Yeah, I was just sort of sitting there and I was like, I just didn't think in 1931, and then I was thinking, hang on, am I thinking of White Heat maybe? So this film, not to have too many spoilers, but I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have seen the film already. So the film relates the story of a young man's rise in the criminal underworld, and of course during the Prohibition era in urban America. And I wasn't really too, of course I knew it was, the ban of alcohol, and even though we had all the speakeasies and all that sort of thing, but it was really how the Prohibition got started with like the temperance movement and all the different religious groups. And I had no idea that so many people were sick with alcohol poisoning, cirrhosis of the liver. I mean, no wonder. Like, they actually, compared to now, and not that they have, there are still people that, drink and are, lots of alcoholics around and stuff now, unfortunately, but the amount that they used to drink back then compared to even now, it's still a lot more.
Well, when you just look at a dining menu of like an upper class family and the amount of small doses of wine they may have gone through. And, of course, we have to remember that one alcoholic beverage isn't necessarily as strong as the other, and portions have varied, of course. Alcohol portions have increased over time as much as food portions. And even Churchill, he was known for having a glass of water laced with a tiny bit of whiskey at 11:30 in the morning.
Yeah, and also, there were issues with the medical industry because doctors prescribed a lot of alcohol-based, cure-alls. But, yeah, I mean, I had no idea. I just thought it was the government being... difficult, but at the time there was such a movement towards it because so many people were becoming really ill with all alcohol-related illnesses, and also the fighting and the drunkenness and...
Well, I don't think the government would have done anything about it if it were completely to their means, to their own interest, because obviously they lost alcohol tax.
Yes, that's
which
right.
is one of the reasons why during the Depression they brought it back. They wanted the extra revenue.
Yeah.
And... kind of also, it's like when you're talking about whether or not you should make prostitution illegal, because people are going to, those businesses are going to occur whether or not the government allows it, and all it really does is make it go really out of the hands of the law. But add to that, yes, you do have all the particular... This is one area where women played this is probably what... when you think of it, in the last 200 years, up until women got... It's actually quite amazing, though. Long before women had the vote in most developed countries, it was really women's Christian societies that played a huge role in encouraging this particular piece of legislation to occur. And you understand their motivation to an extent. I mean, yes, a lot of it would have been motivated by very puritanical Christian views of no drinking, and certainly a lot of... religious friends I've had or have, I often notice they tend to be less inclined towards drinking, so I guess it's part of the culture.
Yeah.
But beyond that, you do understand its linkage with domestic violence and extremes, as well as often wastage of money. I talked about this a bit in the Titanic episode, where a lot of big work sites pay was distributed through foremen to the groups of workers they were in charge of, and quite often they'd only be bringing a fraction of that home because they'd usually go to the bar afterwards and be buying lots of rounds out of their pay packets before actually going home.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's kind of what I found, all the sort of, there's some comedic films about Prohibition. Some Like It Hot is one of them. But, this was... Look,
I think it was ridiculous what the government did and what there was a call but there were extreme cases which we as in every major political ride, were used to ridiculous extremes at times. Like there was a poster I saw of how you could keep a child pure by banning drink, and I'm thinking there's way more in the world that can happen besides their exposure to alcohol.
Yeah, that's true. So I was also just reading that Edward Woods, who was actually originally cast in the lead role, and then the director saw Cagney and thought, no, he might be better. And actually, going further to what you said, the reason that he decided to take Cagney on into the role is because he thought he looked more the role and could pull it off more, but also because they had a much better sound equipment and sound standard in this film. They didn't need the lead actor to have such impeccable pronunciation.
Well, yeah. When we see films made up to like maybe 33, 34, like when we looked at the film Lincoln made by D.W. Griffith, and you have the horse chase scenes that didn't really need sound, which Griffith had mastered in the silent era, and they were done so well. But when you have the dialogue scenes, it's almost like they're kind of doing elocution classes towards the microphone above their head. We have saved the Union.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, well, this film was kind of interesting as well. So it basically shows, a gangster's sort of like rise through the ranks during Prohibition and the trouble he and his family have to deal with, and his friends, etc. But it's also interesting that the film actually had a prologue and an epilogue, apprising the audience that the hoodlums and terrorists of the underworld must be exposed and the glamour ripped from them.
It reminds me of that little speech on the podium that was made by DeMille when you introduced the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's sort of like even at the start of Michael Jackson's Thriller, he has to have like a epilogue saying that he is a Jehovah's Witness and he doesn't condone like ghosts and ghouls and all this this sort of stuff. But it's look, it's one of those
creating the biggest Halloween music video of all time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But it just was interesting that I guess the film, its sort of moral tale was that, there's a life of crime doesn't pay. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So look, there was some interesting because his character, Tom, James Cagney's character, was very sort of touchy with his partner and sort of like pushing her around and things like that. And the director, Wellman, said that he thought that was all right because he used to do that with his wives. So, I just thought it was it was a beautiful film. It looked great. And you just think, people rode around in cars and they, went out to dinner and they, life is the same, but it's very different, if it makes sense.
And looking, when most films we see of set in Prohibition, they're made so long after the time, but when you think of it, Prohibition wasn't even fully repealed in some states when this movie was released.
Yeah, that's right. And there's still dry areas of the US even today.
Well, a guy I know who visited Salt Lake City during the 80s was offered by a waitress at the while having a meal, she just asked, as you would, anything else I can get you? It was like, could I get a beer maybe? And she was like...
Yeah, there's still, parts of Utah, parts of Texas, there are still some dry areas. Most of the states is obviously very wet now, but there's still a few dry areas.
I love that scene where they're, doing a shopping rush to all the liquor stores.
Yes, and they have babies.
Filling it with bottles. But it also, apart from the comedy, it does make a valid point that apparently for the middle to wealthy classes, Prohibition wasn't necessarily the end of their drinking career because they could usually stockpile it.
Yeah.
It was the poor that, couldn't readily buy it. That's what it, in effect, was. And so often that's what happens, these puritanical laws don't think about what happens in practical terms.
Yeah, and then when it was politically expedient and they needed the money, then all of a sudden that went out the window, their morals with regards to drinking. Yeah, and even, the president at the time, he had his own stash in the White House and, and they were even sort of banning, because obviously people were making their own moonshine and stuff, and then they were banning sort of pharmacies and stuff for selling them some of the ingredients that they needed to make it, and then towards the end of it they're like, nah, the hell with it, you can just buy it off us because we need the money too. So
well, there was apparently a wine company that sold these like dried bricks of sort of wine pulp, and it had these instructions on it saying, like a warning label saying, do not mix with water and leave to rest for 30 days, and do not this and stuff because it will produce illegal wine. Wink, wink.
Yes, I was reading that a lot of people are just buying grapes and letting them, and I mean, look, that's how all this stuff was discovered anyway. Someone left something out in the field for 30 days. Oh, that tastes all right,
well, one of the most horrific recipes for illegal alcohol I've ever heard of was you could some actually made sawdust into a type of primitive alcohol because you basically, to an extent, any biological material will do, just as long as it has that natural occurring bacteria that can ferment.
Yeah.
So they used sawdust to make this very primitive form of alcohol, which, like, if you were like really poor and really desperate, you drink.
Imagine a winery offering that sort of the sawdust winery. I guess you wouldn't call it you wouldn't be a vintner, then you could like be a carpenter or something.
Well, it seems to be a tradition in the wine industry currently to give the impression of slumming at bottles. Yeah, maybe.
So we're going to move on to 11 years later for Dear James in Yankee Doodle Dandy, and I think this is probably one of his, if not, I would say this would be one of his favourite films, just looking at the film and everything, once again directed by the great Michael Curtis, who we've spoken about quite a lot. And of course it's a musical of the life story of George M. Well, they say Cohan. I would say Cohen, but Cohan, who produced, directed and wrote and starred in many very patriotic, famous shows in the US, which were very well needed at certain times collectively for the public. So
he has a statue in Times Square?
Yeah, he does. And I didn't actually realise that he started off like as a young child performer. I mean, he was sort of the Michael Jackson of his era, sort of just starting off performing with his family and then kept going. And this is just, I had a feeling I'd seen some colorised version of this on TV once, but I'm sure I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just remembering something.
Well, maybe they did colorise it at some point. I don't know. But one of the things I like about doing this podcast is that because you do certain themes, you sometimes are seeing films you wouldn't have otherwise come across, and which end up being suddenly a new favourite of yours, and Yankee Doodle was definitely for me, because I honestly didn't have high hopes for it when I was thinking of the concept, because I'm thinking, okay, it's going to be one of these really patriotic song and dance things, which would have been fine for propaganda drives at the time, but probably wouldn't have passed the test of time. But no, it was an incredibly strong story, and I loved I love Broadway theatre, and I think that film reminds us of something that a lot of modern musicals are missing, just like having the fun of music. So I just love hearing things like Sweet Charity and stuff that just can bring a bit of a twinkle to your toes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was familiar with several of the songs, even though he sort of, like Cohen, sort of borrowed parts of other songs in his very patriotic songs as well. And I didn't actually realise that James Cagney's, obviously we had Walter Houston in this film, Joan Leslie, but we also had Jean Cagney in this film as well, and that was James's sister, and I sort of saw the name and I thought, oh, okay. So we had the cinematography by James Wong Howe, and it was a Warner Brothers film, and just obviously the score and songs was George M. Cohen's original pieces, and then they were adapted by other musicians as well. So this film it just follows George M. Cohen from when he was a very precocious young performer with his family, performing with the Four Cohens. It sort of starts off with his birth, and his dad even rushed over from where he was performing, and sort of the name's taken from George Washington, but they didn't want to have Washington as the middle name, so he became George Michael. I wonder if that's where the George Michael got it. Maybe. It just shows a progression, but just how talented he was with not only Cagney playing him, obviously was sort of miming the piano playing and stuff too, but just what an epic person Cohen actually was, just writing these songs, getting these shows put on, but obviously showing his good and bad times in life with his different relationships.
It did subtly leave out that he was married twice, and the first one fell apart because of his, extracurricular activities.
Yeah, I guess they tried to make it very patriotic. But look, this is a film that would be great to see fully restored on the big screen with surround sound and fully restored sound, because it just...
Maybe with a sing-along track?
Yeah, exactly. I've been to Sing-Along Greece before, and that was fun. And... Of course, I would love to go to something like that. But I just think to do this film justice, you can imagine groups of people getting dressed up on a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday early evening and going to the pictures and seeing this film and being thoroughly entertained. And even I like the format, like just telling it through his story. He goes to visit the president after doing a show where he's impersonating the president.
I love how minimal the security was.
Yeah, I know. It's just like, oh, Mr. Cohen's here. Yeah, sure, come on. I suppose back then if he, wrote to someone, said, oh, they're visiting me tonight, that would be fine.
Well, up until almost the 20th century, you basically just needed to book an appointment to petition the president for something.
Yeah, and when I had first travelled to the US in the 90s, I mean, we just went on a tour through the main building, and they don't do that anymore since 9/11, but yeah.
Apparently, it sounds so... It kind of really brings out a physical reaction in me, but that they actually have written in black and white that I believe only US-born people can visit the White House now, apparently.
Oh, really? Oh, no. When I was there in the 90s, we went on a public tour through just the main area, not the private areas, but just through the main rooms, yeah.
Well, like most of their major tourist sites at the moment, like the Statue of Liberty in New York and stuff, like you have to buy tickets ahead, and often you need to book at least a week ahead of time, and to an extent I understand it, but it just really goes against the grain for them to say outright US born only. Well, I guess I was one of the lucky ones who got to go in there, and I've just got a memory of lining up with a bunch of other people, and that was the opening time, and it was very quick. It was like 15 minutes or 20 minutes or something, but this is this room, this is this room. I mean, we didn't go anywhere near upstairs or like some of the more private rooms or anything, just the main sort of areas where you walk straight in. But it was pretty good, actually. I'm glad I got to do that. But I think now everything's completely changed over there. So, well, beyond the tourist spots in the building, you probably didn't miss much. Like, that was a time of building where they made nice public rooms and kept the rest minimal. Yeah,
that's exactly right. I thought the Academy Award was well deserved. And it was just such a splendid film,
Yeah, and it's you see often in different periods of time that particularly when there's a desire for patriotic films to have big song and dance, and not all of those may stand the test of time. It's more they're driven by the needs of the present, but like we said before, this is one that's survived well. So I guess that's testament to both the script and the performers. I'd definitely want to see that, like you said, in a big screen, and it does renew that basic love of musical theatre. Yeah,
it does. I didn't actually know that James Cagney had been opposed to a biopic of George Cohen because there was something in 1919 regarding the Actors' Equity Strike, and they were on different sides of that debate. I don't know too much about that myself. And then, of course, the House Un-American Activities Committee, that sort of brought out the worst in a lot of people. So it was actually interesting that James Cagney decided to go ahead and do the film, although William Cagney, who was one of the film's producers, said that it's going to be just the biggest patriotic picture that anyone's ever made. So maybe that was the thing that swayed him.
It's like when we saw Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, it does have a very 1940s concept of American patriotism. Even just your average 9th grade student can point out a lot of gaps in the democracy it glorifies, but it's the optimism which in a lot of places here and abroad that could use from time to time.
Yeah, and so they have. I was just thinking because some of the local theatre companies, like the bigger musical theatre companies around here, could do that. And there was actually George M., which is the stage musical. So that was adapted and brought to the stage in 1968. And I think actually Joel Grey played him in the 1970s. Joel Grey was one of Larry's best friends. I just thought I'd put that out there. And also 1931, when The Public Enemy came out, that was the year of Larry's birth. I just thought, I'll put it out there.
Well, something I've got to mention in our first film discussed tonight, I did love the part where Cagney appears at the doorway, sorry, spoiler, in his bandages, and I'm thinking, it would have been great to have seen him do a spoof of The Mummy, because that's what made me think. That's what it reminded me of, Boris Karloff, was The Mummy with the bandages.
Yeah, look, James Cagney. I mean, yes, he has that. That stereotypical tough guy, and I'm sure all
you
of
dirty,
his
rotten yellow scoundrel, like a rat.
Is that you dirty rat? Is that him, you dirty rat, or is that somebody else?
You dirty rat.
Who? Yeah, so, I mean, he's well known for that. And, look, that's probably just because he was in The Public Enemy and it just went on from there. But he was also a fantastic song and dance man. I mean, he's, right up there with, Donald O'Connor and a few of these other people. So, I mean, I was very surprised. I wasn't expecting to see that. I always knew that he'd been in Yankee Doodle Dandy, but I somehow thought that he wasn't as musical as what he was.
But it's not really surprising that a song and dance man would be so effective as a gangster, because he has that energy, that athleticism, that the ability to quickly throw a glass, be you need to charm the person there and there, because that's what a gangster has to be. They're effectively a PR person all the time.
And also, if you want to get out of going to the army, you just have to show up and do a big dance routine, and then they're like, you can stay here, sort of.
But he wanted to join, well, at least in the movie, he wanted to join the army.
Yeah, but they were like, no. And also, look, somebody who's well-known like that as well, they'd always be a very protected soul in the army anyway, so.
Even then, wasn't he already into... Well, almost 40 by that time?
I think it was more of his age and things like that, because as we know, many famous people did actually go to the war. How much action?
I can't imagine him actually doing a dance at the recruitment, at the recruitment.
Yeah, although, that might be, they're like, this person's crazy, so no. But, look, I really enjoyed these two films, and there's definitely a lot of films of his I would still like to watch. White Heat's definitely worth a watch as well. And he's an older gangster in that film. And, there's some great scenes in that film with a train and, even the ending of that film. So Matt hasn't actually seen it yet, but I do recommend that you watch that film.
Well, yeah, it sounds like a good film to accidentally watch.
I started watching it. I'm like, this film's fun. I wonder how Matt likes it. Then I looked at our list and I was like, I wasn't actually supposed to watch this, but I'm actually glad I did. So we are going to do Greer Garson is going to be our next double. I've always loved that name, Greer, but actually it was Eileen Evelyn Greer Garson. So we're going to do Greer Garson.
That's less catchy, I guess.
Yeah, I know, but I just love that name, Greer. I think that's awesome. But yeah, some people just use their middle name or whatever sounded really good. So we were going to do Mrs. Minerva, 1942, and Goodbye Mr. Chips, 1939 too. I mean, she's made a lot of films, but Mrs. Minerva she won an Academy Award for, and Goodbye Mr. Chips with Robert Donat, that's a very well-known film. So, and Walter Pidgeon was with her in Mrs. Minerva. So we're going to do Greer next time. Please also don't forget that we do once a month, we do another podcast about predominantly historical true crime, which is called A Glimpse of Hell. So we will be recording that episode next week.
And usually the two worlds we describe don't intersect, but sometimes they do.
Yeah, sometimes they do. So thank you for coming back with us.
We should do one time Lana Turner in this episode, in this show, and Johnny Stompanato, her husband, that she may or may not have killed in Glimpse of Hell.
Oh yeah. Actually, that's a great idea. Maybe we'll tee that up for like a double.
Do you think I ever come up with anything other than good ideas?
Of course not. And Matt will be moving to his new palatial residence next month, so we may be doing...
You haven't seen the house yet. Maybe don't say too much.
Well, compared to the resort studios, I think it's... But Matt's palatial residence, Matt's moving to another area of Melbourne, so I think we'll be going back and forth between the resort studios and the palatial residence.
Yeah, maybe hear a baby crying in the background
yes.
here and there.
Yes. So, if you hear shh in the background, that's the little juniors coming along in the middle of the year, which we're all very excited about. And, so we're doing a Grigassen double next time. Please watch out for us or listen out for us on A Glimpse of Hell. And in the meantime, as always, I'm Rachel.
I'm Matthew.
And we're watching good movies. Thank you and all the best to you.